Hello everyone, my name is Scott Jones and I'm your host for this special Canadian Agriculture Literacy Week live event, co-presented by Ontario Agri-Food Education and Partners in Research Canada. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome the 490 live stream viewers who are joining us from across the country, from BC, Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario, PEI, and Nova Scotia. Remember everyone, you can tweet your questions using the hashtag CALW16 through each live event. If there's room in your tweet, please include your name, school, or city, and we'll give you a shout out. I look forward to getting to some of those questions, but in the meantime, I'd like to introduce our guest today, who is Dr. Liette Vasseur. She's a professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at Brock University. She's a member of the Environmental Sustainability Research Center there, and she's also a UNESCO Chair in Community Sustainability from Local to Global. Dr. Vasseur, thank you for joining us today. I'll turn it over to you so you can tell us a bit about your work.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. So yes, I'm a biologist, but I do also a lot of more sociology as well as sustainable development. So what I'll show you is pretty much some of the work that I'm doing, not only in Canada, but also in the world. So I'll just share first the presentation. Good?
Yep.
So, as you can see, the big question is, will your favorite food always be there? Oops. Okay. So why are we in this situation? Why are we talking about climate change? Why are we talking about food? Well, it's because since the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, we have changed a lot our planet. Humans always had impact on the environment, but since then, we have increased our impact a lot more because we're way more people than used to be. And with more impacts, it leads to what we call climate change. Now, today would be a beautiful day with minus 98 degrees Celsius temperature if we didn't have these greenhouse gases. And these are the ones that are protecting us from very strong rays from the sun, but at the same time are trapping the heat within us, within the atmosphere. So where we live, where we can survive. So the greenhouses are very important in the atmosphere, and we have to have them. However, with the production of fossil fuel, burning the fossil fuel, we have been adding a lot more of these greenhouse gases. And that is, for example, carbon dioxide, CO2, coming from factories, plants, home, burning the forest, our cars, trucks, the buses that you took this morning probably to go to school. But we have also other type of greenhouse gases, and one of them is methane. And methane is coming again from production of fossil fuel, but also from our own agricultural system. That is the cattle, the cows, the rice, even the termites, in fact, are producing methane. So it's always a little bit more complicated to look at what it means. Why do we know that climate change is a big problem and it's due to greenhouse gases? But it's mainly because there have been a lot of interesting studies taking cores of ice in the Arctic and Antarctica and different places, and they show a very strong parallel between temperature and CO2 concentration. And the graph that you have here are really showing that. You can see that when it goes up in temperature, it goes up also in CO2 concentration. And over time, specialists, experts have been able to look at how these changes are happening in the past and try to project what we have to expect in the future. So what you have here is the map of the world and what we are projected to get in temperature in 2100. There are different scenarios in function of how much fossil fuel we will be using. So the first graph on the top, it's what we call rapid economic growth. And in this case, you can see very well more red and almost brown colors So that means that we're getting warmer and warmer, and especially in Canada, as you can see in North America, we're certainly getting a very higher temperature than we used to, and that will cause big issues that we'll see in a few seconds. Ideally, we will go to what we call slower economic growth, which will at that point lead to still an increase in temperature, but not as bad. And the reason is, even if we stop today to use fossil fuel, it will take several decades before everything is stabilized in the greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. So we have big challenges. First, population growth. We're expecting 9 billion by 1950, so you'll not be alone. At the same time, well, we love technologies. I'm pretty sure most of you have a cell phone. And we like the modern life, Netflix or anything that you like. And with that, we have also changed our lifestyle and our consumption, even in terms of food. We like more food, and we like diversity of food. But when we think about it in terms of food, we're talking about adding 60-70% more than what we're producing now. The biggest challenge is not only in developed countries, but also in developing countries, so the least developed countries, where there's a need, and the need is great, but they have less fertile soil because they're often ancient soil, especially in Africa. But there are also very strong conflicts, which we know very well, and can also impact food production. Why are we talking about food a lot? Well, it's because we have to remember that feeding the world represents the largest environmental footprint. Agriculture today consumes around 70% of all fresh water that we are using in the world, that is available in the world. And therefore, it's a major contribution also of climate change in terms of CO2 production and NO2 production. And that is in part due to the fact that they are using a lot of fossil fuel to prepare the fertilizer, prepare the insecticide, but also to spray them with the tractors. So what do we eat, Ivor? What does it mean? Well, you have to remember that we only use 15 plant and 8 animal species in the world. That represents 90% of our food supply. Think about rice, potatoes, wheat. How many of you love eating bread in the morning? So that's part of it. But you have to also remember that these 8 animal species, like cattle, goats, sheep, they need to eat vegetables, they need to eat grass, and 1 hectare of grass is needed each year for 1 cow. But with 1 cow, you're really feeding only a couple of people, versus if you grow rice on the same hectare, you can produce 2-3 tons of rice. At that point, you can feed 20-25 people. So keep that in mind. The other issue with climate change, and is not helping the situation, is that agriculture, to be able to produce more, we need to cut more forest. And that means that we're reducing the possibility for forests to absorb the CO2. So this is why there are a reforestation program now to try to reduce this problem. So what will agriculture face? Well, the first thing, lack of water, I would say. And this is just a world map, again, from 1995 to 2025, which is not very far from now. And you can see the changes in color. And when you look at the darker, the yellow, brown, these are countries that will need more and more water, and they will have less and less. So that's a big challenge. And you can see, for example, we're talking United States, we're talking China, most of the Middle East. So you can see that where there are conflicts, there may be more conflicts. Again, remember, 70% is for the agricultural system. The other problem, and this is a table from Ontario, is we're projecting also more heat wave. So heat means more evapotranspiration, so less water again available, but it means also droughts. So from the baseline, between 1961 and 1990, we had around 5.5 days of heat. So that means greater than 25 degrees Celsius. When we get to 2071, for example, we're talking about 36 days. So that means over a month of summer when we have very high temperature and most likely droughts. So that will cause a lot of challenges in terms of burning, in terms of food production being more and more difficult to do. The other issue is soil health, because with heat, drought, overuse of fertilizer, trying to irrigate as much as possible, it leads to what we call erosion. So that means the reduction of the layer of soil, which disappear either wind or water. But it also leads to salinization. So that means introduction of salt, because you have more concentration of elements, and also land degradation. And when you have a land that is degraded, difficult to grow vegetables. So the results, unhappy baby, but also unhappy doggy, since we have cut all the forest. So we have to look at what can happen and what to do. And this is what usually most countries are trying to do now, is try to figure out how to adapt. What are the technologies or the solutions that we can use that will help us to still produce? What you have here, it's what we have to expect if we do different activities. So here is the developed countries on the top. And as you can see, if it's climate effect only, production is going down under all the different scenarios. However, if we start adapting, and there are different types of adaptation, I will be talking in a few seconds, hey, we can probably do still better. Unfortunately, as you can see on the lower part, for developing countries, this is not often available. So climate change is going to have a huge impact on their economies. And that means that even if they try to adapt a little bit, they may not be able to do as well as we do in developed countries. So we need to rethink agriculture. And this is where sustainable agriculture is coming in. It's very important, especially now with sustainable development goals that have been accepted last fall. And what it means is to conserve animal and plant genetic and species diversity, and at the same time, using environmentally non-destructive, technically appropriate, economically viable, and socially acceptable techniques. So it's a big balance. It's a big challenge, and I will say that there are a lot of people trying to do that right now to make sure that we can do it. And it's doing pretty good. There are very positive results. For example, and these are pictures from Ecuador. I was there last December, and we visited a farm where they did the regreening. So what they use, reforestation and diversification. So in this forest, you have orange, you have coffee, you have bananas, you have different type of plants that are growing all together. What it helps is retain the soil moisture, and it helps a lot for the farmers to keep its production. In China, we work on polyculture, for example. Polyculture is when you have different squares, small square, of different crops. So this is what you have here, corn, rice, pepper, ginger, and they are mixed together, and they are rotated. So that means that once they finish harvest the corn, they will probably plant beans, for example. So you change all the time. So you increase the diversity, and it helps a lot to keep the soil moister, easier to deal with, and helps in terms of reducing pests, for example, too. This is another case where we work in Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso in West Africa. It's a very poor country, and we help the school garden with manure from the goats, because they have a lot of goats there, and diversification of the crops. So you can see here cabbage mixed with onion, corn, eggplants, tomatoes, and the garden was doing very, very beautiful. So this is what we call nature-based solution, using diversity. There are still some challenges. Water is a big one. Rural women are responsible usually for the family water and a large part of the farming. And these are two students helping me in the well to try to get water, but the well became dry gradually. So the women often have to walk up to 5 kilometers a day to get their water to another source. So that's always been a big challenge. And this is why adaptation will be more complicated to do in these countries than in developed countries. Crop rotation, for example, is also good for pest control. And more diversity of pest enemies, like the little ladybugs here, reduce the aphids on cotton and help the farmer to reduce the use of pesticide. So it has a good impact because it reduces also fossil fuel application. So just to remember, we have only one planet. If we don't take care of it, we'll be in big trouble. So each of you, you have a role to play in knowing how to deal with biodiversity, how to conserve diversity, how to better deal with sustainable agriculture. So I thank you very much and looking forward for your question.
Thank you very much, Liette. So as you know, we have our class from Grimsby, Ontario joining us live. So I'll just turn it over to them if you want to give us a quick wave and say hi.
Should I turn off the presentation?
Sure, that would be good.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll get to the question from Grimsby then, and it comes from Graham. What impact do you expect climate change to have on agriculture in Canadian regions like Niagara?
In Niagara, we already are starting to work a lot on sustainable agriculture. And the main reason we have two extreme events that can probably bring us to having more difficulties. The first one is droughts, because we're projected to have more droughts over time. As I said, we have higher temperature, that means more evapotranspiration. So that's a big issue. The other one also is the issue of heavy rain. When we get like the flash flood that we had a few times in the past few years, it can damage quite a lot the plants. And that can cause a lot of reduction of production. The other problem also is that we have migration of new pests coming from the south because it's warmer here and they can survive. Think about the ticks, for example, or the mosquitoes, and they bring also other disease with them. So these are the type of things that we have to be very careful.
Okay. I'll take another one here. This is from Madison in Grimsby. She wants to know, why did you make the choice, as you did, to do your research in China and in Africa?
That's good questions. My research in Africa, the first one in China started, in fact, in 1997. And it was through a CIDA project. So CIDA is for Canadian International Development Agency. And had a project that was looking at community-based conservation management with the Fujian Agriculture and Forestry University. And since then, we have continued to collaborate. I should say now they are way more advanced than we can think about. And a lot of funding is coming from the Chinese government because China is pushing a lot to move towards sustainable agriculture. In Burkina Faso, it started the same way with the Canadian International Development Agency project. And in this case, unfortunately, it finished in 2011. And I've not been able to go back because, as you know, they had the Ebola virus. They had a lot of civil unrest, so I've not been able to go back. But it's a country that I would like to continue to work gradually. This is why, in fact, I'm working also, for example.
Okay, cool. So I'll turn it over now to Sir John A. MacDonald in Waterloo, Ontario. And Yang Xu from that classroom wants to know a bit more about vertical farming, if you're able to tell us anything about that.
Yeah, vertical farming, there are different technologies at this level. But I imagine you're talking about those that are trying to optimize the space. And that's I would say the largeness, especially for urban centers. I should say there is a very nice, interesting technology that is used now for lettuce in Quebec, in Montreal, and it can produce quite a lot. We're doing it in some way here, even with the greenhouses. As you probably know, most of the tomatoes, green pepper, are now produced in greenhouses in the Niagara and Southern Ontario. So this is something that's becoming more and more popular, not only in Canada, but in many other countries. And this is like something that can be quite good if it's done without too much, I would say, overuse of water and electricity, because you need a lot more electricity when you use a greenhouse, for example. And it all depends where. Like here, we have mostly renewable energy, but if you're from China, for example, where most of the plants are with coal energy, that's not necessarily the best thing.
Right. Okay. So that kind of leads into my next question, which comes from Verdun Collegiate in Verdun, Manitoba, and they want to know, what can we do to help promote sustainable agriculture in a conventional farming-dominated region?
Interestingly enough, even in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, there are people who are working on sustainable agriculture. We have some organic farmers. They are a little bit harder to find, and the main reason, the big challenge for them, is because they are going in very large hectares. When we look at farming in, especially in this region, Niagara region, usually farmers are going for a couple of hectares. They can go probably to 10 hectares at the time, but when we look at the prairies, that's for sure, we're talking about square kilometers in some cases for wheat or canola. So that's a lot more. And that becomes a little bit more challenging. And this is where it's important to start thinking about what are the other technologies that can be used. Hedgerows, for example, are techniques that are helping reducing a little bit the erosion between fields. There are different other techniques of irrigation that have been used too that can help, but it's more complicated, that's for sure. We'll see certainly new crops in terms of genetically modified or selected that are better to deal with droughts, for example. And this is not only here, it's many other countries in the world are using that.
Okay. So Amber from Carmen, Manitoba wants to know, what do you think is the most harmful effect of climate change on agriculture? Is it the lack of water? Is it the increased frequency of droughts?
Well, it's so complex. The first thing is for agriculture, the fact that we have to cut forests to make agriculture in many countries, especially in Latin America, for example, South America and Africa, it means that we reduce also the possibility to absorb the CO2. And to be able to do that, but we have to use a lot of fossil fuel. So it's kind of a catch-22. It's really difficult to know what is the best way. I would say that, yes, water is a big issue, especially in regions like in Africa. It will become more and more severe here. We sometimes forget, we think that because we have the Great Lakes, because we have nice rivers everywhere, that we have a lot of water. But the water is not always easy to use, and that's going to be more and more complicated over time.
I see. Okay. So we hear a lot about, and you talked a lot about human-induced environmental change, the CO2 going to the atmosphere. Are there any natural factors, though, that can contribute to environmental change?
Oh, yes. Well, we always have, storms always existing, for example. That's something that is natural. And you have to remember, climate change at the baseline is normal because it always changed from, over thousands of years. That's normal. What is the main challenge right now is we're changing the climate a lot faster than what it used to change. That's the main difference. And the main reason is because of these greenhouse gases being accumulating so much that we're heating the surface of the soil and the atmosphere in a way that it makes it a lot more complicated.
Okay. How adaptive are these ecosystems that you study, though? So I'll take this question from Tess on Twitter. In terms of, will there be any plants or animals that will thrive from climate change and be able to adapt?
Yeah, we know that, for example, there are some pests that are thriving very well with higher temperature. Not good for us, but still something to think about. I know that in Africa, for example, there are some species of sorghum that are a lot stronger than rice, for example, or corn to survive when there are droughts. So how can we use these ones to better feed the people in a country where there are droughts on a regular basis? So we have to find, interestingly enough, many traditional species may be more adaptive to changes in climate change than the one that we're using right now.
Okay. What about, so comes from Carmen, Manitoba again, your opinion on the use of GMOs to reduce the impact on the environment. Is that a good way for us to go?
It's always controversial. It all depends what type of genetically modified organisms we're talking about. In some cases, it's normal, you know. Since we started agriculture, we have selected our plants. So they have been genetically modified. It all depends what we're doing and how we're doing it. So this is why, for example, it's important to have a lot of research. We have done research, for example, on BT rice, so Bacillus thuringiensis integrated into rice, and just to make sure that it doesn't have impact on the ecosystem, and also what type of, if it can have impact, for example, on the pest enemies by making them harder to survive, that would not be good. So this is why we have to be very careful. I think we know that that it's necessary in some cases to move towards genetically modified, but we have to be careful what kind. So this is why it's so important to first do control studies to know what's happening with them.
Okay. I read on your website that you're very into the idea of interdisciplinary research in terms of looking at ecosystems. What do you mean by the term interdisciplinary? Like, what sort of people are you involving?
Okay, but because when we look at agriculture, when we look at the ecosystem, I started as a biologist. And I discovered very quickly when I started working on climate change and environmental issues that it's not only a question of plants and animals, it's a question of human, because it's the human interaction that are important. So this is why I started doing more interdisciplinary research. So what it means is working with sociologists, working with economists, working with managers. I've been working with Environment Canada, Parks Canada, but I've been also working with people, from the institute that are more in the economy sector, for example. In fact, next week I'm talking to somebody who's working in the insurance industry, because this is how it works. It's really trying to get all the discipline. And I should say that most students should try to be exposed to not only biology, biologists, but geography, economics, and a lot of these different disciplines that will give you the additional skill when you work in the environment.
And you also have an involvement with the United Nations too, right? In informing policy development with them. Is that correct?
Yeah, through the UNESCO chair. The UNESCO chairs have a network. And so often we have to give our opinions or help to the UN because it's all part of it. I'm also part of the International Union for Conservation Nature, and I'm currently leading the thematic group on climate change adaptation at the Commission for Ecosystem Management. So we're producing often papers, position papers, documents that are being used either by the UN or by other groups that are involved at the international level. Yeah.
Great. That's very cool. Okay, so I'm getting bombarded by several questions along the same line from several different provinces, which is how can our students get involved locally to reduce climate change, to have an impact on an individual basis?
Well, there are many ways. In some cases, it may be how do you school do in terms of well, not only recycling and all that, but in terms of water use. Do you have sprinklers in the summer to keep the grass clean, for example, and green? Do you have a solar panel to reduce the use of fossil fuel from electricity? Do you overuse probably electricity, leave the lights on, for example, at night or when nobody is in the classroom? So there are many things like that. Individually also, are the students talking about food diversity, are they getting connected to food diversity? Do they try different things at school that is probably quite interesting to taste? Just recently, I was in a meeting with agrologists, and they were talking about eggplants. Because now eggplants, we don't have only the Italian type, but we have the Indian type, and we have the Chinese type, which are very delicious, and that can help a lot in diversity, and it's going to be grown here in Ontario, for example. So there are many ways. Each of us individually can do a step. For example, reducing our meat consumption. Even if you, instead of having meat twice a day, reducing to once a day, it's already a way to help.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. Lots of good ideas. I'll swing back to Blessed Trinity in Grimsby, and this question comes from 3 students, Ty, Brooklyn, and Kieran, and they want to know, are there any effects on the kinds of technology that farmers are using in order to deal with climate change? Perhaps they have to change the way that they farm. I'm not sure what they...
Yeah, there are many ways. I'm working with farmers here in the Niagara region. And for example, intercropping, which is having more than one crop. So we have a crop of onions and a crop of lettuce one by one, can help reduce the use of insecticides, for example. So that's a way. Using manure, we're hoping to test very soon what we call agrominerals. And agrominerals it comes from a lava rock, and here in Ontario, in Spanish River. And this is it's kind of a soil that you add to the soil, the original soil, and that can help enhance phosphorus. So you don't need to use as much phosphorus. And phosphorus is a big issue in agriculture, because this is a finite, there's not that much left. We know that in 40 years from now, phosphorus will become a very big and limiting factor.
Okay, nice. So a question from Travis, also at Blessed Trinity. Will we see any economic damage to Canada from climate change? Will we have to produce other products to export?
Well, this is something that we know over time. Yes, there will be economic challenges for Canada. And the main reason is, especially in the prairies, having higher temperature means more drought. That means also reduction of production. So in these cases, yes, this is something that is seriously considered. The other part, and this is why I'm working, I will be talking to people more in the insurance industry, is the fact that if you have more extreme events like hurricane in the coastal, that it's Atlantic or BC, that you have more flash flood like we had in southern Ontario, or you have hail storm in the summer. All that will cause problem to agriculture. At one point, it means that the insurance has to pay more, and that's a huge problem. So it's a question of economic cost, but also a question of less production too. So this is why it's so important to start thinking about adaptation. How to change, in some cases, that means changing the crop system that we're using.
Okay. Can you give us, and this is from Haynes in Ontario, can you give us an idea of any of these new varieties of produce or foods to be grown in Canada?
One that is working quite well right now is sweet potatoes.
Oh, okay.
Sweet potatoes is only in the last couple of years that have been grown here in especially in the Niagara region. They are growing very well. So that's one possible. Okra is another one that is getting most likely some attention. And the varieties are not necessarily the gluey one, it's more the dry one from India, but it seems that it can work quite well here too. So yeah, there are some new varieties and new species that can be grown here. And this is something that we have to start looking at.
Okay. I'm hearing from multiple students wanting to know about this idea that's tossed around of a critical threshold. Can you maybe tell us what that is?
Yeah, the famous critical threshold that probably most of you have heard was especially in December last when we had the COP21, so the last climate change meeting. And this is the famous 2 degrees Celsius. The reason 2 degrees Celsius is because we know that when we reach a certain level of temperature, global temperature, more impacts will happen, and they will happen more frequently and more drastically. And so that means that the climate will change in a way that it's almost not possible to reverse the process. So this is why I should say the working with the United Nations framework on climate change, I know that the Secretariat was very, very concerned about the 2 degrees Celsius. We know that we have to slow down because even 2 degrees Celsius is too far. Many researchers are now talking more about 1.4, 1.7. So this is why we have to really start working on it, because that means melting of the glacier, melting of the ice caps, changing the water circulation, changing the current, air currents also. So that can be quite drastic.
Okay. This might be a bit of a more technical question, but how are you able to isolate for the effects of environmental and climate change over, say, naturally occurring changes in ecosystems? Like, what in particular are the things that you look for?
Well, the experiments that I've been doing, like right now, I have one here directly at Brock, where we have a simulation system. So what we have is structures that are simulating drought. So that means that we are reducing the watering in some places. At the same time, we have plots, so squares, where we overwater. So that means that then we give them, for example, 100 millimeters of water within only 5 minutes. So they get a lot of water and very quickly. So these are ways that we know what can happen. And this is done not only here, in many other countries where we can simulate. When I did my postdoc at McGill, we had what we call open-top chambers. So they look like greenhouses, round one, but they have no top. And what we do is we shoot CO2, so higher CO2 level in these chambers, and we measure how the vegetation, the plants, the animals are reacting to that. So these are the different type of experiments that we're doing. The other type of experiments that we do is directly in greenhouses, that it's here at Brock or at McGill or many other places, where we grow under very specific conditions, either high temperature, low water, or high water, low temperature. So we can change a lot of these conditions. So there are many types of experiments that we can do to figure out how it works. And usually we have control. So the control is the natural component. So that's how we do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm getting lots of questions that are coming in to do with the idea of no-till farming. In particular, Amber from Manitoba wants to know about that. Can you tell us first what that is? How that
Yeah,
helps with
no-till.
that?
Yeah, no-till is when we don't use, so once the harvest is done, the farmers will go back and plow the field. So this is tilling, and it can be done in the fall. Often they will do that also in the spring. What happens is that means that you remove all the vegetation from the soil. So you have no vegetation at all when it's tilled. So the no-till is when you keep the crop, so the stock of the crop. So for example, you'll see cornfield. Why it's so important is because, in fact, two components here. The first one is that if you remove all the vegetation, the soil is exposed to the wind and the water, and you get more and more erosion. And we know that it's a big problem. We're losing tons of soil every year at different places. So that's one aspect. The other aspect that people are probably not aware is that when you're tilling, you break also all the beneficial microbes that are in the soil, especially the fungi that are very good usually to keep the health of the soil. So that's another aspect of it too.
Okay, good. So we're running a little bit short on time. Maybe I'll get one more question in here. And that is, what advice would you have for our students that are listening today, presuming they would want to get involved a bit more, maybe study something similar to what you're studying? What advice would you have for them?
Make sure that you have all your courses, science courses done first. And that means, and that's probably something that nobody told you too much. It's not only a question of doing, as a biologist, doing biology courses, but it's also to be able to do statistics, for example. So if you have the chance to do a course in statistics, go for it. Chemistry. You cannot work with soil, for example, without knowing your chemistry. So these are all courses that are important. But as I said earlier, diversified too. Okay, when I talk about diversity, it's at all levels. And that means make sure you have a geography course. Make sure that you have a course in economics, even if it's a basic one, just to give you an idea of what they are talking about. That's very important.
Right. Okay. So thank you for that. Unfortunately, it looks like that's all the time we have for today. So I'd like to say thank you to all of our viewers, and of course to you, Dr. Vasseur, for taking the time to answer our questions and share your expertise.
Great, thank you, and thank you for everybody.
I'll quickly just do a quick pitch for free agriculture and food-related resources that are available to us. And those can be found on the Ontario Agri-Food Education website, oafe.org. So future events for Partners in Research live events, we have our next one Wednesday, March 9th, when we learn about proteins and take a virtual tour of a Queen's University research lab with Dr. John Allingham. So that'll be good to hear about that. In the meantime, thank you again, Dr. Vasseur.
You're welcome. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye for now.